Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating divergence in global tech. Specifically, we're looking at OpenAI's May 2026 personal finance surface launch. Now, when this dropped, it really felt like the dawn of this seamless, totally global financial AI rollout, right? But as you'll see in just a minute, the reality on the ground is way more complicated. Okay, let's dive into this and shatter the illusion of a simple, universal launch. So, think back to when that US launch happened. It was absolutely massive. But more importantly, it was entirely permissionless. The developers didn't have to go knocking on a government door to ask for a license. No way. They simply built on top of private aggregators, companies like Plaid, and connected to over 12,000 institutions basically instantly. They just bought an API key, kept the system strictly read-only so they wouldn't trip over any heavy money transmission laws, and they shipped the product. Compliance wasn't some massive hurdle. It was literally just an off-the-shelf purchase. But here's the kicker. That fast and loose strategy absolutely does not cross the Atlantic. And this brings us to a brilliant structural thesis by analyst Thorsten Meyer, who hit the nail on the head. He notes, in the US, you ship a finance surface. In Europe, you license one. So the crucial point is that trying to bring this exact same AI product into the European market means slamming into a massive wall of mandate. You just cannot copy-paste the American playbook. To really grasp the sheer scale of this difference, here's our roadmap. We're going to logically unpack this heavy topic step by step. We'll start with 1, the American permissionless model. Then we'll hit 2, Europe's wall of mandate. Break down 3, the 3 regulatory layers. Look at 4, replacing the connect button. And finally, we'll answer 5, who actually wins in Europe. All right, section 1, the US permissionless model, a frictionless baseline. To fully appreciate that European wall we just talked about, we first need to understand the frictionless American baseline. The foundation, or let's call it the substrate, of the US market was built privately. Access to your bank account data, that's treated as a commercial product. Tech giants can literally just buy compliance and connectivity right off the shelf as an API key. And because the AI is explicitly designed as read-only, meaning, it just looks at your spending but doesn't actually move your money around, it expertly sidesteps all those fragmented state-by-state financial regulations. In America, compliance is basically an afterthought to the product itself. Okay, moving to section 2, Europe's mandate wall, a strict public rulebook. Now, here is the rhetorical reversal you have to keep in mind because this is wild. In the EU, absolutely every layer that the United States treated as private and permissionless is actually a strict public mandate. This is a total paradigm shift. In Europe, compliance isn't just a constraint or, some annoying checklist you scramble to finish right before launch. Compliance is the architecture. It's not just stricter American rules. It is a completely inverted build order. That slick conversational AI you're interacting with, it's just a paper-thin interface sitting on top of a massive, heavily regulated legal core. Which brings us to section 3, the 3 regulatory layers. So to see how this architecture is actually built, we have to look at these 3 specific frameworks. First up, PSD3 and PSR, the Payment Services Directives, which create one single, inescapable rulebook for payments across all 27 member states. Second, FIDA, which takes open finance rules and expands them all the way to investments and pensions. And third, the massive EU AI Act, which classifies risk and threatens literal global turnover fines of up to 7%. And this brilliantly illustrates how a single app is just getting squeezed by payment, data, and AI rules all at the exact same time. It's a massive regulatory Venn diagram. Let's dig a bit deeper into the data side with FIDA. Say you want to give a user that amazing unified dashboard of their total net worth. Well, FIDA requires a completely new license called a FISP, or a Financial Information Service Provider, a category that practically doesn't even exist yet. Aggregating all that net worth data, it's not going to be free. It requires the specific license. Get this, it will likely mandate compensation fees that are paid directly back to the incumbent banks just for the privilege of accessing the data. And then we have the AI Act. This places any AI functionality on an absolute razor's edge. If your AI just summarizes past spending, yeah, you might be fine. But the very moment your AI says something like, hey, here's a loan you qualify for, or it tries to assess your creditworthiness, boom, it crosses the line into high-risk AI. You've instantly triggered severe compliance burdens, mandatory audits, and huge registration requirements. It's a real catch-22 because the most commercially attractive features are exactly the ones that push the tool right into high-risk territory. Which leads to this incredible structural surprise. European financial AI answers to bank regulators, not tech regulators. You're not dealing with some modern digital tech agency. You are dealing with traditional heavy-hitting financial supervisors. We're talking about institutions like Germany's BaFin. Tech challengers suddenly find themselves having to play by the exact same supervisory rules as century-old banks.
Okay, Section 4, replacing the connect button. This is the UI/UX reality in the EU.
Let's transition from all these abstract rules down to the tangible reality of what a user actually taps on their screen. Just look at this comparison. The US experience is famously just a single connect button, right? It's one tap, super broad scope. Basically, let's collect all the data right now and we'll figure out how to use it later. But in Europe, that default American approach is a direct violation of the law. Europe requires a full consent dashboard. It has to be granular, it must be easily revocable, it has to state explicit purposes for every piece of data, and everything collected has to be strictly minimized under the GDPR. And this brings us to a really powerful realization. As the saying goes, in the US, the surface is the product and consent is a button. In Europe, consent is the product and the surface is the interface. That European app literally has to intentionally introduce friction right in the exact spots where the US version was brilliantly optimized to remove it. You are legally required to slow the user down. Finally, Section 5. Who wins in Europe? Let's talk strategic consequences. So, we're shifting our focus from regulatory analysis to business strategy now. Let me pose this critical question to you. If someone needs to build this mandate-first, high-friction, heavily licensed AI surface, who actually builds it? Now, the obvious answer might seem to be those fast-moving US tech winners, right? But as we've seen today, that assumption is completely wrong. American tech labs operate at a massive disadvantage here. They are permissionless native, not licensed native. They completely lack those deep, supervisory relationships with European regulators like BaFin. And think about it, their absolute core competency, moving fast, scraping data, deploying broadly, is literally what the EU outlaws. They arrive in Europe entirely unequipped for a mandate-verse market. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the advantage violently redistributes. Look at who actually holds the cards here. 45% goes to incumbent banks, and 40% to licensed EU fintechs. The advantage swings massively toward the boring incumbents. Why? Because they already hold the data, they already have the licenses, they've built the regulatory relationships, and they already have the user's granular consent. US tech challengers are left fighting over just a tiny 5% sliver of the pie. And compounding all of this is the staggered timeline. It's a moving target, stretching from August 2025 all the way out to 2030. US tech companies can't just sprint and launch. They have to survive this constantly evolving regulatory gauntlet. It's an environment that actively favors endurance and really deep pockets over launch speed and agility. So when you step back and look at the entire board, the reality becomes glaringly clear. The mandate is an incumbent protection architecture. The exact regulations that were drafted to protect consumers end up structurally shielding the very legacy banks that those US challengers were originally meant to disrupt. Which leaves us with this final, vital question. Does Europe's mandate ultimately deliver better consumer protection, prioritizing our data rights and safety? Or does it simply build an unassailable moat for the banking incumbents of the past, stifling the whole future of AI-driven finance? It's a structural divide that will absolutely define the next decade of agentic commerce. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you next time.